Fellow Pennsylvanians, I present to you the 1983 Distinguished Pennsylvania Artist, John Updike.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you all. Pennsylvania, to me, is simply life. It is the place where I entered life, and the area around Shillington and Reading provided almost all of my impressions of life until I was 18 years old. Though I left Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania has never left me. It figures in much of my work, and not just the earlier. The example of the people I knew in my boyhood set me of good humor and industriousness has stood me in good stead. There is something God-given in the richness and atmosphere of Pennsylvania that I have tried to reflect in my fiction and poems.
When I was born, my parents and my mother's parents planted a dogwood tree in the side yard of the large white house in which we lived throughout my boyhood. This tree, I learned quite early, was exactly my age, was, in a sense, me. But I never observed it closely. I'm not now sure what color its petals were. Its presence was no more distinct than that of my shadow. The tree was my shadow, and had it died, had it ceased to occupy, each year with increasing volume and brilliance, its place in the side yard, I would have felt that a blessing, like the blessing of light, had been withdrawn from my life. Though I cannot ask you to see it more clearly than I myself saw it, yet mentioning it seems to open a possibility of my boyhood home coming again to life.
Shillington was a small, roughly about a mile square, cohesive town of about 5,000. There were many kinds of people who did not live in Shillington, which I've become aware of as I've moved, going out into the world. I didn't know that at the time. I was just aware of it as a kind of unit. In the 30s and 40s, when I was growing up there, it was the kind of town where the town cop would dress up as Santa Claus on Christmas afternoon and give you a box of candy in the town hall. It was, there was this sort of institutionalized coziness that was delightful to a child. It was helped, I think, by the Depression and the World War, which sort of froze. So at any rate, I've been looking all my life for towns, and I've lived by and large in small towns. By preference. I think they're a very natural, nice way for people to organize themselves. You are compelled to deal with your neighbor instead of being able to select out of an urban mass the people who think like you do or who do the same sort of things you do. The image of a high school meant extra much to me because my father taught at one, and I, of course, finally went to one, so that not only Rabbit Run, but many of my short stories are about high schools as shapers of American character. Don't know if that's still true. I expect it is still true to a large degree, that the high school that the public school from first grade on is where we learn how to be Americans, for what it's worth. And that Americans, when they meet in Antarctica or China or Bulgaria, know each other through having been to a public school somewhere, and the cheerleaders and the football games and all that. And lastly, I think that Berks County probably was an exceptionally pious and family-centered sort of place. So I've carried out into a world where both piety and the family are taking a beating. I carried out a certain, whatever strength such an upbringing gives you, and also a sense of a possible ideal of behavior, of human organization that I hold the people in my novels up against. Obviously, they don't measure up to these ideals of piety and family cohesion, but I think it's in the back of my mind always as something that we should measure our lives against.
Beyond the poorhouse, where Philadelphia Avenue became a country lane and crossed the little brook where watercress grew, there was a path that led to the poorhouse dam. It was a sizable lake where people fished and swam. Beyond the lake was a woods that extended along the south of the town. Here, my parents often took me on walks. Every Sunday afternoon that was fair, we would set out. Sun, birds, and treetops rotated above us as we made our way. If at moments I felt what they wanted me to feel, the sweet, moist breath of mulching leaves, the delicate scratch of some bird in the living silence, the benevolent intricacy of moss and rocks, and roots and ferns, all interlocked on some bank, torn by an old logging trail, I did not tell them. I was a small town child.
I was, I think, very much aware of being in the middle as a child. I neither lived in Reading nor in Mountain. We certainly weren't rich. We weren't exactly poor either. That is, we had a kind of comfy, biggish house, and most people live, in this sense, in the middle. America is mostly a country of people who think of themselves, at least, as middle class. There are very few people who will identify themselves as upper class, and not so many who would come out and say, I'm lower class. So it's a country of the middle. It's a bourgeois country. And I have written about people in the middle because those are the people I know, and also out of choice, out of a conviction that this is the mass of these people, the people of the United States of America in this century at least, and that therefore this is where I must plant my flag as an artist, and this is where I must find things to say.
To transcribe middleness with all its grits, bumps, and anonymities, in its fullness of satisfaction and mystery, is it possible? Or in view of the suffering that violently colors the periphery and that at all moments threatens to move into the center, worth doing? Possibly not. But the horse chestnut trees, the telephone poles, the porches, the green hedges recede to a calm point that in my subjective geography is still the center of the world.
I've been coming back ever since I left, of course, and I'm always sort of excited to see the old house in Shillington because it's where I spent the first 13 years. And it was a bit of a jump for me to move to the farm, though I think now it was probably a good thing, and I was ripe for getting out of Shillington, or out of that particular house at least. But children are conservative, and I felt bad the night we moved, and I've never stepped into the house again, but I have been in the yard and looked at the tree and seen the tree get bigger and older, and I guess it might die before I do at this rate, although you never know. At any rate, it's an old tree, as I'm getting to be an old guy. My suspicion is that time is the ultimate subject of any novel, and that the great novels are those that give us a sense of the enormous deeds that time causes in passing.
When I was born, my parents and my mother's parents planted a dogwood tree in the side yard of the large white house in which we lived throughout my boyhood. This tree, I learned quite early, was exactly my age, was, in a sense, me.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.